Hey everyone. We are now at the last week of the semester, and it has been a short but fast and educational trip. And I appreciate those of you who have really tried to stay up. I know 8 weeks is tough and it goes by a lot faster, but I also removed a lot of the excess work to try and give you an opportunity to get through and do the work that needed to get done. So I hope that you will take advantage of the opportunity and finish strong this week. All the work has to be in by Friday, so I can start submitting the grades. So please do try and finish up strong and don't quit. Uh, it's important. Okay. So this last chapter is. I mean, they're all important, but this one has a lot to do with humanitarianism, which is a big part of my life and what I do in my own work outside of IBC and even inside of IBC. It has to do with the global refugee crisis. And, it's, we have, around the world, individuals who are in struggle from results of civil war, from general wars, from authoritarian regimes, from poverty. There are a lot of reasons why people leave countries, religious persecution, all types of things, ethnic persecution, where people will try to leave wherever they're from to try to get to some place that's safe and gives them an opportunity to thrive just as a human being. And so this chapter kind of takes a short but important look at it, and I want to give it its due diligence. So let me jump into this. So, I mean, refugees have been existing since the beginning of time. Particularly whenever, even if you go back to ancient Greece and Rome, Egypt, or even before then, whenever a group or a city-state they weren't countries then, but regions were at battle, and whoever won, those who lost would have to try and find a way to keep from being killed or oppressed, so they would relocate to different cities and try and protect themselves. And so, in the modern context, this has been manifested itself, particularly since World War II. And we just talked previously about the Middle East, and so the 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 plight of Israel and the Palestinians certainly is the hallmark, if you would, of the modern context of refugee crises. Those who were Jews who were fleeing Europe, excuse me, were fleeing Europe during the 1930s and 40s as Hitler rose and blamed the Jews for all the ills that happened in Germany and started to exterminate them. Many of them fled to their homeland. Some of them tried to flee the United States and were refused entry. Uh, and so, trying to find someone who will embrace those who are in struggle is a humanitarian issue, and one that sometimes you find countries that are amenable to it, and you find others that are not. Just like with us, with regard to with our southern border, with Mexico, and many people coming up, not who are not even Mexican in their heritage, but coming in from Central America and those areas that are coming across because of all because of the disintegration of political infrastructure, social infrastructure, economic infrastructure, rise of violent gangs in those regions, and lack of jobs certainly propels many folks from those areas to come up to the United States where they can find work and try to find a way to support their families. Um, so when we talk about it, of course, we have to talk about it under understanding that, yes, it is, it's an economic issue, it's a political issue, there's cultural considerations that need to be dealt with. But the biggest one, and I think is the most important, is the moral question. Um, People who call themselves good Christians and all those things, sometimes when it comes to helping others, can or cannot be helpful. And sometimes there's a question there: what is our responsibility to other human beings, especially not only to them as individuals, but collectively, and how we humanize them or dehumanize them through this process. So just to give you some background and figures in terms of how the crisis has grown. So as you can see here on the chart or on the PowerPoint, in 2015, the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, estimated that there were almost 6.5 million people who were displaced as a result of conflicts of varying degrees, whether they were civil wars or direct wars. In fact, there was even an Olympic team. One of the Olympic teams was a refugee team that was fleeing persecution. Over a million, you can see over 1 million refugees have poured into Europe since 2015, and this has mostly been as a result of the crisis in Syria, where over 5.5 million Syrians have had to leave as a result of the civil war that's been ongoing there since 2011. So imagine having a 10-year war, and the people are always the ones, the civilians are the ones who struggle and are displaced as a result. But this has also been the case in other parts of the Middle East and also in Africa and parts of Asia. Like it shows here in 2016, over 100,000 people from African countries crossed the Mediterranean trying to get into Italy. And it got to be such a problem. Several thousands of them have died. But the other part of the issue is the Italians started paying other groups from Libya to block or to prevent those Africans from trying to get into Italy. And then, of course, there's always those who are part of the criminal element who are also part of this problem. And that comes from smuggling, trying to smuggle the individuals out of countries and into other countries. And as you can see here, that's a $5 billion a year industry. And some of it's not just smuggling, but some of it's also human trafficking as well. So there are also those who are put in very compromising positions by those who would say they're there to help smuggle them to their places. So it could end, some of these people wind up in slavery situations as well. So it's a significant problem, global problem that we're facing. So in terms of like recognizing the issue of regarding politics, violence, and geography, so of course it's the Syrian war, civil war, again, that's 5.5 million people. And the causality of it was, again, we talked about in the Middle East part, but not in great detail, was the Arab Spring, which was this push toward democracy in the Middle Eastern countries and mostly the North African countries in late 2010 and into 2011. And a lot of the countries had little glimpses of success, but most of them had fallen back into disrepair from their experiment with trying to push democracy. And they had all kinds of protests and mass demonstrations in parts of the world that had never experienced that because they had so many authoritarian regimes. But nonetheless, these things contribute to the crisis scenario of refugees. Even in the war in Iraq in 2003, there were thousands of displaced Iraqis, thousands of displaced that moved into Syria and other peripheral countries as well. But what people don't realize is that a lot of the countries around there cannot afford to take in these people. So it becomes a multifaceted problem because you're taking poor people, moving them to other poor countries that they can't financially afford to take care of them, and then you've got a bigger problem. And so this is sort of ongoing throughout Africa, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. And it's interesting to note that Turkey, which is on the nexus of being a Middle East country, but is trying very hard because of its European ties to join the EU or the European Union. But because of its treatment of this Kurdish minority in the southern part of Turkey, as well as the President Erdogan's heavy-handed authoritarian tactics toward not only the Kurds, but also even though those who don't support his regime, has led to problems with him getting a free ticket into the EU. Now, since a lot of these refugees have wound up in Europe, it's been really quite an interesting test case for acceptance of refugees, and it's going to be, in the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to see a huge population boom in Europe for Middle Eastern folks because of the number that are already there. And when a generation passes and people start having more kids, then of course these populations will grow incrementally. But some of the concerns in Europe are, and they're legitimate concerns as well. First, primarily the issue of terrorism. That you bring people in who've been dispossessed, who've been poor, who are angry and upset about the consequences of what happened in their own countries. They hate the West. They hate Europeans because of the history of colonialism, for example. And then you are bringing them to your country to say, hey, we want to help you. And, but most of them are living fairly, in squalor and struggling. And so it wasn't like they walked in and everybody said, hey, welcome to my country. Here, just get you a nice, good middle class existence. Everything's going to be cool. It's not like that at all. And you probably have seen that from some of the videos that you've been watching. But it's also the cost of housing or taking care of those, or providing for those entities, those individuals that are in your country. So if you've got a million refugees in your country, and you talk about the cost of taking care of them, you can imagine how prohibitive the costs get to be. And then also the issue of intercultural integration. When you talk about, this is one of the struggles that actually happened with the Jews who had been living in Europe for several hundred years from like 1500, let's say, to 19th century, through the 19th century, in Europe. They've been culturally integrated into Europe, even though they were still Jews. And then when you try to take those Jews and move them back into the area known as Palestine, where the Palestinian Jews had already resided for thousands of years, well, several hundred years of being culturally integrated into European society, they may have been Jewish by heritage and even some of their religious context, but in reality, a lot of their mentality and education were very Eurocentric. And so this creates a huge problem. And then how do you integrate these people into your society, particularly in areas that are these are not Islamic countries. So obviously the issue of Islam and how do you meld these individuals into your society is a real problem. Germany, as you can see, has been one of the better countries in Europe to be able to sort of handle these individuals. And Angela Merkel, who is the head of Germany, who's the chancellor, really has taken a strong stand towards supporting the refugees, even though it has put huge strains on their welfare and social structures in that country. And it's also led to opposition because there are those who are not happy because they're, individuals who live in Germany are saying they're paying a price as a result of the integration of, or trying to integrate these Middle Eastern, or these Syrians, if you would, into their society. And then in France, the same thing. I mean, the French have really, because of the rise of terrorism there from a couple of incidents that have happened, have really tried to push very strongly against the immigrants and these refugees because of their experience with terrorism in their country. And then other countries like Great Britain, part of the reason that Brexit, which is, Britain was part of the EU, and then they decided to try and bail out, which I think was a horrible mistake, but that's up to them, was based on the fact of the refugee crises that was going on in the mainland of Europe. And because in most of Europe, if you're a European citizen from any country in Europe, you can freely travel between the various member states of the EU. You don't need a separate passport. You can have just the passport from your country. And then the United States has really been the weakest of all these in terms of accepting refugees. We've only taken in about, as of 2016, there were about 10,000. Now we're probably about 12,000 or so, if that many, from Syria, along with those from other countries that come here. Of course, we have a long vetting process, and former President Trump had issued an executive order that banning all Muslims from being able to immigrate into the United States. So the United States has really done a fairly poor job, many would argue, on helping the global crises of refugees, using the justification as a national security threat to the United States. Sorry, I got a little bug here. Let me clear my throat. And so now when we talk about, like the nations who are hosting the immigrants or refugees, Yeah, this is one of those things that, again, has led to, the anti-immigrant movement and anti-refugee movement, as I mentioned earlier, the issue of terrorism. And there have been attacks in a lot of the major cities in Europe, Berlin, London, and England particularly. And this, of course, leads to, widespread fears. It leads to, sort of a negative view or feeling about Muslims in general, even though a lot of it is not real. Or, it's like you could have a handful of radical people who can profane Islam and profane the Quran in their own view, and the view will cause the rest of the group to have to pay for their consequences for their views. So it's unfortunate, but most people don't understand the religion or the context of how it works or any of it. So it really is an unfortunate situation. This has also led to a sort of a rise of, these sort of right-wing militant groups that basically are anti-immigration, anti-Muslims, anti-anybody who's not like them, which is mostly white and European. And it also has led to a rise of authoritarian regimes because these countries are so afraid that they want to get these hard-handed leaders to come in and basically take control, and sort of a very pro-European, Eurocentric mentality, and get rid of those who don't look like them. But, and then again, other issues include, like I mentioned before, the cultural integration issue is a big issue. The issue of women's rights and, religious law and prayer and Sharia law, which is the Islamic law. And, how do you blend in ideologies from other countries into your ideology? Like, for example, if you had Sharia law that was practiced in, say, Germany, well, does it supersede German law? Well, to the Muslims it would, but to the non-Muslims it would be like, wait, what? You have our laws supersede your laws. So trying to figure all that out in the short term has not worked out so well. It doesn't mean it may not in the long term, but it's going to take time and really dedication to try and work through those things. It's funny. One of the greatest myths about refugees or these migrant workers and things like that is that how much they hurt their national economies of other countries. Well, the economic data completely dispels that myth. Even in the United States, they always say, well, the people coming up from the border, they cost us billions of dollars, and actually what they found is that that's absolutely not true. That in fact they contribute significantly to the U.S. gross domestic product, to GDP. And so those folks come here to work. They buy groceries, they pay taxes. A lot of them, they pay into the infrastructure. So it certainly has shown that they are a greater contribution rather than a risk. And so with that, I would say that, it really is that we have to, on the humanitarian side of things, be able to stop looking through we have to work through our ignorance and fear and try to come to understand and respect other countries, other peoples from other countries and the plights they live with. And it's very difficult sometimes unless you put yourself in their shoes or the shoes of little children and that they're human beings first. And, it's no different than when people here come across the border and there's all these become border angels, and they would put out water and food and stuff, even clothing for folks who are coming across the border illegally. And then there were these vigilante groups that were going in and either poisoning the water or destroying the water or destroying the food, so that the people who were coming across wouldn't be able to have water to drink to survive. And there have been thousands of cases of people trying to get across coming across into the U.S. Not far from our location here in the valley, that they find dead in the desert. In fact, the Hopeville Cemetery has a huge area that is dedicated to refugees and migrants who've tried to come into the country illegally. And yes, you could argue, well, yeah, they're criminals because they're coming across, but think about it in the context of people who really are just trying to flee brutality and repression in their countries, and having a country that doesn't want you, but also a country that would treat you like less than a human being. And we should all rise better than that. Okay, that is it for this lecture, and this is the last lecture of this class. And I thank you all for your time and attention. And I wish you a great summer. I hope that I will actually see some of you in person in the fall. And I wish you guys the best, okay? All right. Take care.